the Eurozone. Let's go to Wall Street now, where traders are digesting some good numbers from the car company Chrysler, the best quarterly profit there in 13 years. Michelle Fleury is on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Michelle, these Chrysler figures are pretty good for a company that almost went under about 3 years ago.
It's quite a turnaround. I mean, this is the car company, as you pointed out, that needed a $12.5 billion lifeline from US taxpayers just to survive. Now fast forward a couple of years and it's doing tremendously well. As you mentioned, its best year in 13 years. It saw US sales here up 39%. US consumers snapping up things like the Jeeps, the Rams. The company's done a very good job at cutting costs, and it's also been very successful at sort of making more money out of each car it sells. According to one pricing website here in the US, the company makes roughly around in excess of $29,000 on each car now. So when you add that together, the fact that it's making more money on each car, and on top of that, that also it's selling more, well, you get the kind of results we're seeing today.
Now, speaking of results, an indication of the health of the US economy. We've had two sets of figures, jobless claims, but also housing figures. What do they show us about the recovery in the US?
Well, I think it's a pretty mixed picture, because if you look at the weekly jobless claims, the number of people filing here in the United States for unemployment actually has risen, or I should say has fallen by 1,000, and people were looking for a much bigger drop. And I think what that spells is some concern, certainly amongst economists, that perhaps America's recovery may not be as robust as people hope, because of course we've seen over the last 3 months a big improvement in the labour picture here in the United States. So I think people still want to see what's going to happen next week, what's going to happen with the monthly unemployment figures, to see whether the improvement that's been taking place can last. Now, if you look at the pending home sales, in other words, people signing contracts to buy a home, that's actually shown an improvement, which is pretty good, given you just heard from the head of America's central bank yesterday saying that the housing market here in the US is still depressed. So the question is America's housing market now sort of coming off the bottom? In other words, can things get any worse? Are things finally starting to improve? And I think, again, it's difficult to tell because you have such a mixed amount of data coming out. For example, just earlier this week, Ben, we had another report saying that prices continued to fall in the housing market. So I would say they're still a pretty mixed picture.